Okay, welcome to another VR tutorial in the movement series. This one is about NavMesh movement in VR. And if you want to skip the tutorial and get right to it, you can get our pack. It's called Mobile VR Movement Pack, right there on the Unity Asset Store. So this includes the NavMesh movement example, and it's a little bit better than what we're going to make today in the tutorial, but it's the same exact thing. So let's go through the tutorial, or if you want to get right to it, go ahead and just download that Unity asset. So I have a brand new project. What I'm going to do here is start with the terrain, and so I can have a texture, I'm going to go ahead and import the environment pack, and I'm going to go down to the terrain section. So I don't need anything here, no trees. But the terrain assets, I'll get the surface textures and import those. So I have something to put onto the terrain, and I'll just grab the brush and draw some mountains around here. Looks good to me. Let's click on the textures and add one of those grass textures. Looking good so far. Now to bake a NavMesh, there's a lot of really good tutorials on there. So I'll just go real basic. You can click on the navigation window, and I have it docked here by the inspector. And so I'm going to make sure that my object is set to static, and specifically navigation static. But if you fully set it to static, of course, navigation static's a part of that. So now that it's static, I can bake a navigation mesh to it, and so here's all the settings that you can go through. And it's a good idea to really dig into these. You got the agent radius. That's the radius of your character and your character's height. The max slope is what's the slope that the navigation that you're going to be able to navigate to. And then there's step height, and step height is how high the character can step. So if you have steps, for example, the character wouldn't be able to go over a step that's 0.4 in height. So then there's some advanced, but these are the basics. I'm just going to stick with the defaults, and I'm going to click bake. And I'm going to have to save my scene so it can bake it. So now it's baking the navigation mesh, and it's using all of the variables that we've defined to figure out where can the character navigate to, and here it is. Anywhere that has the blue tint on it is part of the navigation mesh, and the player will be able to go. But here, of course, the angle's more than 45 degrees, so the player won't be able to go anywhere past this point. Alright, now that we got a navigation mesh defined, let's get it working for VR. I'm going to go ahead and import the Google VR 0.91, which is the current package. And I know I'm not going to be publishing for iOS, so under the plugins folder, I can go ahead and unselect iOS, save a little bit of disk space. So I have the Google VR project here. I can go ahead and go to the prefabs folder, bring in the GVR viewer main, and because I have a main camera, if I were to hit play, that's just going to work. Now for movement, main camera needs to be a child, so we're going to create an empty one called VR main or VR player. And this is also important for tags, because we need to define a tag for the player. So the VR main is the player, and if you look at the main camera, the tag here is main camera. So really, when you're building VR, you should have two game objects, one for the player and one for the main camera. Especially if you're going to be moving the character, it has to be set up this way, and the main camera has to be a child. So now that I have a player with the tag, and I got the main camera with its tag, I'm ready to go. I got the Google VR working already, so I'm going to bring this player, and it looks like the main camera and the player are way messed up, so I'm just going to go ahead and 0, 0, 0, and now the VR main is in the correct position. So the NavMesh agent is going to go onto the VR main, since the camera itself can't be moved. So I'm going to say NavMesh agent, and let's focus in on this now. It looks like he's below the ground quite a ways. I want him in the middle of the hills here. That looks about right. Focus on it again. Still underground. There it is. Now there's a problem because the camera's at the feet. So I'm going to go ahead and I could move the camera up by 2, and that would be okay, but I prefer to have everything at 0, 0, 0. So on VR main, on my NavMesh agent, I'm going to move the base offset to 2. And so now everything is at 0, 0, 0, and the NavMesh knows that it's the one that's offset by 2. So now the feet are on the ground, the camera's at the head, we can hit play, and we have a NavMesh baked onto the train, and we have a NavMesh agent on our player. Now all we have to do to move it is move it. So we need to add a script for that. I'm going to call this script walkable surface, and it's going to be applied not to the player but to the terrain itself. So I'm going to add a component to the train, and it's going to be called walkable surface. Now this is a C# script, so I'm going to open up Visual Studio, or Mono Develop would work. So the first thing we need to do is define our variables. We're going to be working with 4 variables here, and they are the player, so I'm going to say private game object player, and we're also going to be working with the NavMesh agent, so NavMesh agent, and I'm going to call that NavMesh agent. We're also going to need a hit, and so this is a NavMesh hit. And what a NavMesh hit is you can call a navmesh.raycast, and the output from that is the NavMesh hit, what was hit. So this page right here with the NavMesh raycast has an example and all of the documentation on what we're working with here. But essentially the NavMesh hit is a raycast that goes out and it looks for navigation mesh, and it comes back in it and it tells you if it hit one or if it didn't. So we need a NavMesh hit because we are going to be shooting out a ray from the VR head. So we have NavMesh hit, and then we're also going to be needing a private bool for blocked, and I'll explain that in just a second. But what it'll be doing is finding out if that raycast is blocked or if the character is allowed to walk through. So first of all, we need to populate a couple of vars. The player is going to be GameObject.find GameObject with tag, and we're going to say player, and that's going to work because we've already defined player onto this GameObject, and this one's main camera. So it's going to find the correct GameObject, and then we're going to need to get the NavMesh agent, and the NavMesh agent is going to be equal to player.getComponent NavMesh agent. And I know that's going to work because it's found the player by tag, and I have a NavMesh agent component on that. So a NavMesh agent component, it's going to find it, populate it, and we're moving on with the script. We're not going to do anything in update, but I am going to make a public void on pointer down. On pointer down means I'm going to call this when the pointer input goes down. So that's when the player touches on the Gear VR input, or if they were to click on the Google Cardboard button. So on pointer down, we need to define a raycast hit, and I'll just call that one hit. We also need to say if physics and do a raycast from camera.main.transform.position to camera, or in the direction of camera.main.transform.forward. Send the data out to a hit, and we'll do a length of 100. That way the player doesn't travel halfway across the world. So first of all, let's find out if the player's blocked. And because we're going to say blocked is equal to NavMesh.raycast. So this is where the NavMesh hit's going to come into play. NavMesh raycast needs a vector 3 source position, a target position. It's going to go out to a NavMesh hit, which is this. So the source position is going to be the NavMesh agent game object transform position, and the target position is going to be hit.point, and that is this hit and the point that hit. So first we did a raycast and we went out hit so that we have a point in the world. And so if that raycast is successful, then let's find out if it's blocked. And we're going to do that, and it's going to be true or false. So we're going to do that by saying NavMesh.raycast, or now we're doing another raycast to the point that the first raycast hit, and it's starting at our NavMesh agent or our character's position. So we know we're going directly straight in front of the VR player. And so if it gets a hit, we're going to send it out to NavMesh hit. And we also need to say an area mask. And so what this is NavMesh.all areas. Now to help understand what's going on, let's do a debug.drawLine. And we're going to draw the line from the NavMesh agent game object's transform position. We're going to draw the line to the hits point, so the point where it's trying to draw a line to. And then if blocked is true, so the path is not clear, we'll draw a line that's red, and if the blocked is false, we'll draw a color of green so we know that the path is clear. And I want the line to stay for 10 seconds so I have time to see it in the scene window. Okay, so if blocked is true, so we've shot a ray out, it's hit a point on the NavMesh, but the player cannot travel to that point. So if the path is blocked, let's draw a line where the player is going to walk to so we can see that and we can understand what's going on. This time I'm going to use debug.drawArray because instead of passing 2 points, I'm going to pass in a vector 3 direction. So the start is going to be the NavMesh hit dot position. So NavMesh hit dot position is not the same as hit dot point. So the first thing we did was we shoot a ray and it hits something, and then we know which point is directly in front of the player's eyes. So now that we have that point, we can do a NavMesh raycast. So the navigation raycast tries to get to hit dot point, and it sends that out NavMesh hit. But if it can't get all the way to hit dot point, it goes as far as it can and it comes back with that position. Now if it can get all the way to that point, it'll come back with that position as well. But in this case, because we've tried to get to a certain point and the path is blocked, so we know we can't get to that point, the NavMesh agent is at some other point closer to us, to the player, and we need to know where that is. So I'm just going to draw a ray, and the direction I'm going to use is vector 3.up, and I'm going to do a color.red because this line is already red if the path is blocked. So if it's blocked, it's going to draw a line from the character to the point that it tried to go to, and then it's going to draw a red line up at some point closer, which is the point where as far as the character can go. So color.red, and then we're going to use a time, so 10 seconds. So we have time to go look at, see in the scene window what is happening. Now if that happens, let's go ahead and just tell the NavMesh agent and set the destination to the NavMesh hit dot position. So that is going to move the player as far as he can go to the edge of the NavMesh. Now, any other case, which is the path is not blocked, let's just tell the NavMesh agent to go to hit dot point. Now we can use hit dot point here because our first raycast was from the VR's eyes, straight forward, and the point that it hits, if the path is not blocked, is the point that we want to move the player to. So that is the entire script. Now whenever I'm coding, especially in tutorials, I like to put one comment per line, whether or not it's a good coding practice. So let me go ahead and put my comments in real quick. Okay, I got the entire script on one screen, so if you need to pause it now to copy the script, go ahead. Pretty simple script. This on pointer down is not going to get called automatically. In order to make that happen, we're going to have to select the terrain, and we're going to have to add a event trigger. On the event trigger, we're going to add a pointer down, or you could use pointer click, but a click consists of a down up, so I like to use a down, just say, hey, if they push that button down, go ahead and shoot it up, fire that event. So I'm going to drag the walkable surface script into this field. Then I can say walkable surface on pointer down, and I can do that because we got a public variable that I called on pointer down, so I can select that like this. And the other thing we're going to need to add here is a event system, and because we have the Google VR, we can go ahead and add the gaze input module and move that up above the standalone input module. To make things look a little bit better, I could go ahead and add a dot from the prefab UI folder and put that onto the main camera. And in order to make all of this raycast work, we have to add a physics raycaster to the main camera game object. Now that's all in place, we could hit play, and we see that anytime we're looking at the terrain, it's responding to it. So you might want to adjust that for your game, but we know, hey, we're looking at it, we can move to the point. So I'm going to click on the top of the mountain, and I started moving, but it rotated my head, and that's not fun in VR. I'm going to get sick. So you need to go to VR main, and on angular speed, I'm just going to put that to 0 because I want to turn my head by myself while I'm in VR. So let me try this again. I'm going to click on the top of the mountain, and I'm moving straight for it. Now I can look around while I'm moving. I'm going to continue to go towards that object. And I'm going to climb all the way up the mountain. I stopped. Now if I look at the navigation, sure enough, I've hit an area that I can't go because it was too steep. So let's see with all the debug line drawing what's happening here. I just clicked so you could see the green line from where I was to the point that I'm moving to. My character will walk all the way to that point. So now I'm going to try to go to the top of the mountain. And I'm going to pause so I can look at what's going on here. Okay, I got red lines. So you can see the red line that I tried to go to. That didn't work. But we have this vertical line here. And it says, okay, you tried to go here. That didn't work. But this one will. And I'm going to move right to this point because that's as far up the nav mesh that the player can go. Perfect. Okay, well, I hope this helps your game or app in VR a lot easier to make. And if so, remember to give it a like or a comment and subscribe. There's going to be a lot more VR coming right here on this channel. Thanks for watching.